Okay. Sorry for the delay for those who are joining in Zoom, and welcome everybody. So who leads the energy transition? And that's more a provocation than something to be answered. But we're going to see. Okay. Ursula von der Leyen said, I want Europe to become the first climate neutral continent in the world by 2050. That's quite an interesting statement and quite an interesting start for a new area in the energy and climate policy in Europe. So my name is Semida Silveira, as you know. I'm a new Swedish, Brazilian, European faculty in Cornell. And this is my first time giving a seminar here. So in commemoration of that, for those of you who are here, I'm circulating a little bit of a Swedish street so that you can keep your concentration. It's a chocolate with blueberries. Going from where we are today to carbon neutral future in 2050, so 30 years is going to be a big, big challenge. And how is it really going to happen? So that can be a question that many people outside, particularly outside the EU, may be asking. So just to situate, the European Union was formed in 1958. Today we are 27 members because the UK left the Union. The UK budget responds for 2% of the public spending in the EU. This is very important if you consider that you get this impression of the enormous power. And it's true that the European Union has a lot of power, and it's also true that power does not necessarily come with a lot of money, which is very interesting. Approximately 1/5 of this budget today is going for climate action. And for energy, it works, we have the subsidiarity principle in relation to the power of the member states. And that means that the European Union operates in a system of directives and goal target settings, but the member states are very free to develop their own policies according to their own realities, because the countries are very, very different. And that creates, of course, from time to time, some clashes, but in all, it is quite interesting that it has worked in many ways, and the countries are learning from each other. Some are more ambitious than others, and that relates to a number of things, constituencies, also the aspect of how the energy metrics of the country has evolved over time. Also to situate, this is a map of the European Union with the US population overlaid in different areas. Technically, Europe is double as big as the US, but since parts of it is actually Russia and countries that are not in the EU, so the EU is about half in size in terms of area, but the population is 40 or 50% more than the US. So Europe is much denser than the United States. This is a timeline of milestones in the EU. And I marked here a few things. First, in the climate policies became a very, very big issue. In Sweden, it started in, let's say, in the 80s in particular, with the controversy around nuclear power. But also in many countries, 70s, of course, at global level because of the oil price shocks that came and changed very much the geopolitical situation in the energy sector. Sweden introduced the carbon taxes in 1991, was a pioneer. I have a paper on that. It took 10 years actually to discuss, and the Swedes have a tradition of consensus in politics. So that means it takes some time to get consensus, but usually when a decision is made, it actually goes very well for implementation. It's very solid. So the carbon tax in Sweden is solid. It's been adapted to the reality of, for example, the European carbon markets, but it's a very important aspect of the Swedish energy policy to shift to renewables. And it has been very successful. It is very cheap compared to, let's say, the European trading scheme or any other very complex scheme, because the carbon tax in Sweden is put on the amount of carbon in the fuel. This means that you don't actually need to measure the emissions. So you measure the carbon. And so it's very straightforward, simple, and it helps very much. So it's relatively cheap, gives a lot of money to the government to do other things. In fact, energy taxes in Sweden are a very important part of the government budget. Germany introduced the feed-in tariff for renewables. It's a rather expensive model, but it has been very successful. Sweden had some other model that came later with a clean certificate, which is very similar in a way, but somewhat cheaper. And the way you distribute the cost is a little bit different. But really, things started happening at the EU level in '97, when the leaders said, okay, we have to do something here to reduce emissions, to go to renewables. And so there was a target of 12%, which is, seen from today, it was small, but that was what was possible then. Things started, there was a lot of lobbying, etc., etc. But in 2009, the Renewable Energy Directive finally came. I'll say a few more words about that, just to keep the track here. So we got the directive on biofuels here that had a big impact, but also there's a lot of controversy around the biofuels in Europe. And then there is the offshore wind that really took off with the Renewable Energy Directive that came in 2009. And so now we have a revised Renewable Energy Directive in 2018, and eventually now we want to migrate to a net zero future. So this is the directive when it came, the 2020. It was easy to remember. And it is very surprising when we see now the EU goal for this 2050. So 55% reduction by 2030, that's less than 10 years, and then carbon neutral in 2050. When? First, it was, the target here was 20% less. Internationally, I have been following the negotiations since the beginning, and it is, there was, the promise of the EU was that they would rise to 30% if the world agreed to be more ambitious. So this stayed in the discourse for quite some time. Today, we have had a reduction of approximately 30%, more in certain areas. And the EU has this target for 55% to 2030. These were the three pillars of the Renewable Energy Directive in 2009: security of energy supply, climate change, and market competition. Having followed that from the inside, I used to work in the Energy Agency. At that time, I was skeptical if Europe was going to really manage to put together all all the members to implement the directive. But it is the equation around the energy and climate, energy directive in particular, has been very strong. The climate change was there, very strong in the discourse, but was, I think, my interpretation is that what has driven very much Europe is the security of energy supply, because Europe is very dependent on energy imports. And the realization of that actually made Europe mobilize for this. So in the discourse, climate was the most important, I would say, at that time. Today, and particularly after the pandemic, etc., it's a little bit different, because the acceptance and the approval for climate policy in Europe is increasing. In some countries, it's extremely strong. And so this is opening, of course, is putting climate in the forefront. Doesn't mean that security of supply has become less important, but it does mean that climate change is at least as important, as we will see also in the budget. And market competition has always been a preoccupation because, of course, the European companies operate in an international global market, and singling out Europe and putting too many burdens in the in the European industries would mean, of course, an imbalance internationally. Europe could lose investments in industries, etc. So there has been always a preoccupation in relation to that. So what's the result? The result of that is this. The European Union actually managed to get the 20% renewables in the matrix. In the last minute, maybe the pandemic helped a little bit, I must say. But we can see also from here that there is a very uneven distribution. Countries are in a very, very different situation. So you don't change an energy system in 10 years. That's one lesson. Of course, we know that because there is infrastructure, there are vested interests here and there. You can see that Sweden is leading, but Sweden was already leading when this was set. When this target was set, Sweden was already over the EU target, far. But still, each country was asked to make their own plans and their own targets. So there is a kind of agreement on reciprocity in the European Union, and the idea to help each other catch up. So Sweden set a target, a higher target than was required, to 49%, and today actually Sweden is in 60% renewable. Then we have countries here that are not really there. We have, for example, Poland, that is below. Poland is a big producer in the US, in the EU, and it's actually in clash with the European Union right now, that they have made plans and they are not fulfilling their plans, and the European Union is now withdrawing funds. So it's really very pushy. So that creates a lot of clash, because there are other types of political clash, etc. United Kingdom is not in the EU anymore, but would not have managed either. And so some countries like also France, that says they are going to go, they have a very ambitious plan for renewables, that they are very much like in the power. They are big nuclear power producers, and actually recently announced that they are going to invest in 10 new power plants, etc. And to this upsets very much, for example, Germany, that has a policy to close down. So there are all these differences inside the EU, but nevertheless, they have been able to manage through this. But still, if you look, that this is how it looks. This is 28, so United Kingdom is included, but it wouldn't have changed much. What we see is that the matrix is still very dominated by fossil fuels, but we do have very clearly here the penetration of the biofuels and waste, and we have penetration here of wind and solar that starts to be visible. in general, hydropower doesn't have much opportunity to expand in the European Union. Except in Sweden, there are 3 rivers, but they are protected by law that they cannot be explored. They're in the northern parts, but otherwise, hydropower is not so much. But here there has been a shift from coal to gas and a reduction in oil. So on the emission side, then, what are the accomplishments? The dark blue line shows is the net. Yeah, sorry. So the light blue is how it looked before, because we didn't talk about net, we talked the absolute emissions reductions. Now we're talking about net emissions, which is including the sinks. So basically, the European Union reduced 30% in the ETS, in the parts of the system that are included in the European trading scheme for carbon. The plants have reduced 46% in total. So it's been also quite successful, despite many things that need to be reviewed in the trading scheme and will be reviewed now. But as you can see, in the way it is now, it's not really on track. But the European Union has a system that every 5 years check up how it is going and then adjust. So if they see they're not on track, then they put new policies in place. So push the countries to actually address those. So there is some work to do there to come, and there is a big plan, the package of Fit for 55 that the European Union has put to address that. We can see also that in this idea of guaranteeing security of supply, the EU has made significant progress. We have gone there from 82% dependency on fossil fuels in 1990 to some 70%, which is still quite high. Yeah, and in certain respects, more complicated, as I'm going to show next. This is the share of fossil fuels, also to show the differentiation that some countries are extremely dependent. Again, here, Sweden is in not the last one, but to be the last is good in this case. And this is basically transport, and a little bit in the steel industry that uses coal for in the process. And this is also being addressed now with new plants that we are going to operate in hydrogen already by 2025. But you can see that some countries are very, very much dependent, like the Netherlands, Ireland, Poland, because of the coal also, and etc. So Europe imports most of its energy still. This is about the controversy that the whole thing around the energy dimension of the Ukrainian crisis can be narrowed down to the gas issue. And personally, I believe that the solution to the Ukrainian crisis has to do with the issue of energy. And energy is going to help actually address that crisis very, very much. Because as you can see here, this is not the amount of gas that this country uses, but the reliance that they have on Russian gas for the gas that they use in their matrices. So it's a very, very high reliance. Germany, for example, 40%. And what has been happening is that we have now Nord Stream 2, which is a big pipeline, ready to use, but not yet regulated, and there is a lot of controversy around that. Russia has withdrawn natural gas deliveries a little bit, and all in all, it matches the capacity of Nord Stream 2. So there is a real push to open the Nord Stream 2. Some countries think we should not do that, but there are various issues related to that. We can come to that afterwards, and if there's interest to talk about it. And you can see that these already noticed. Oh, this, I don't know whether that, but anyway, forget about this infographic thing. This is not an infographic, but the natural gas imports to the EU have been changing, but still you can see here very clearly that it comes basically from Russia, and now we have also that the United States here coming in, exporting gas to the U.S., and it's actually shown in the U.S. balance, where you see that U.S. now has become a net exporter of oil, or of fossil fuels, of energy, particularly because of this gas. So this is opening for other arrangements, but still, it's not a very quick fix, considering that Europe is really dependent on the gas that comes from Russia. Meanwhile, the prices of gas, in all this crisis, the price of gas has gone up very, very much. And it's a combination of factors. It's not only this scaling up of the conflict recently, but it was already going on, particularly last year. It started going up, and the price of gas has gone up 170% since more or less a year back. This is creating a lot of problems in Europe. A lot of people are not managing to pay their bills. So we have a big discussion on energy poverty now because of that. Given that subsidiarity that I talked about, that the countries are so different and they have the freedom to organize their energy policies, they are also very different. And then, for example, in electricity prices, this is reflected. The numbers are cents per kilowatt hour, and you can see that Germany has a very high price, and that's very much the price of the energy vendor, their big program for renewables. Also creates conflict because there's been a lot of effort to integrate the European electricity market with the new constructions of exchange. And for example, at a certain point when there is a lot of production of renewable power in Germany and it goes to the French side, that means German taxpayers will be funding a little bit of the price of the renewable that the French users get, and so having all these differences is still possible, as we can see, this big differentiation in various ways, but it's not without conflict. Every now and then kind of it blows up a little bit. You see Sweden has traditionally had relatively low electricity prices. This is for household consumers though, and the lower prices is very much also for the industrial sector, because the industries, Sweden has many energy-intensive industries, the steel, the pulp and paper, and chemical industries. So there has been always a preoccupation in that. So there is a strong lobby for low electricity prices in Sweden, and this lobby now is pushing very strongly for opening up for nuclear power again. Here is where greenhouse gas emissions are by economic activity. Let me call your attention to the area of electricity supply that is being cleaned with the renewables, which is interesting. That is visible here, the reduction of emissions in that. There is a variation, seasonal variation, etc. But also, all in all, we have a declining. We have declining emissions in electricity. What we have also, the greenhouse gas emissions in transport is pretty much the same. So in Europe, we're still stuck very much with the oil in transport, and you're going to see there is a major effort now towards transport. Even Sweden also, that has been very successful before in many ways, but also the transport is receiving a lot of attention. But Sweden already has 40% of renewables in transport, which is the highest in Europe. Europe had a target of 10% renewables in transport in that 2020 package, and not many countries managed that. So it is a nut that is difficult to crack. Now the climate law. Now the European Union has made a climate law. I find this quite amazing, considering the discussions in let's say 15 years ago, that now there was enough support for a climate law. And this is also interesting because sometimes we think that policymakers are short-term, or that they can make a decision today because they are not going to be there when it's time to show compliance. But also here the European Union is good in that sense, because it actually provides very much that long-term perspective. So a new target now for 2030. There is also this time much clearer preoccupation with the sinks, and there is a big program now for recuperation of soils in the EU. EU doesn't have much area available for many things. Maybe that's why biofuels was never really, the big thing there. There is not so much area. It's a little bit different for a country like the US or Brazil that has a lot of land. But in the EU, there is a very big preoccupation also with food security, and so to keep the agriculture areas open for food production. There is the creation of the scientific board, and also provisions for the adaptation to climate change. And then there will be sector-specific roadmaps. How will that be? Well, the decarbonization will go through a number of things that were already there but are being revised, but also a number of new things. For example, the aviation and maritime emissions have really been free riders in many ways since the signature of the Climate Convention. It has always been, it's not possible, it's not possible. Personally, I worked a lot with biofuels. I found always that it was incredible that we did not have a program for aviation quite early, because you had a lot of willingness to pay in aviation. If you want to go and visit your family on the other side of the world, etc., there is not much choice. You cannot go by train. And so the willingness to pay is very, very high, and you'd have been dealing with a much smaller number of stakeholders. But somehow the focus was very much in road transport and private transport in the beginning. Now it's going up to, of course, trucks and other areas. But now there is a very clear, over the years there has been a very clear development around aviation and maritime transport. The EU emissions trading scheme has been very successful in pushing for emissions reduction. So now aviation they will create a new area of European trading scheme to also encompass aviation. And the area of infrastructure, not to have that situation of being with the chicken or the egg first. So the new package brings a lot of work to integrate the transport networks in Europe. The revision of the Renewables directive goes from this, we had the 20 until 2020. So the new goal is 32, but the idea is to actually expand that to 40%. That's the new push, to have 40% already as a new 2030 target. And For the efficiency, also to push more. Efficiency is a tricky thing. I think efficiency is still, there's a lot we can do there. And in a way, I also saw that in Energiewende. I discussed it with colleagues in Germany. I said, well, it seems that somehow, in order to kind of push very much for renewables in the system, you kind of, giving a little bit of a blind eye sometimes to energy efficiency to allow the system to go towards renewables. Doesn't mean that it's not happening. There is a lot of efficiency improvement in buildings and a new provisions now for renewal of public buildings, for example, so that we can scale that up. Here you can see a little bit the progress of the states, and the reds are for areas where maybe not much progress has been seen, but most of the countries have 3 triangles, blue, 1 triangle red. Like, for example, Poland, on the renewable energy, Poland has a hard time because of their coal. Or Finland, that is actually quite successful in many ways, but still needs to catch up a little bit on GHG emissions, etc. But Sweden, Denmark, Croatia, Italy, Spain, Portugal, very much on the track. This would be a little bit, but this is just to illustrate the how far we are from the, let's say, emissions in the top. So the emissions will be still a very big challenge because we have many sectors, so we need to do many sectoral adjustments, and but still, I think there is a lot of acceptance that we need to be looking for the alternatives. So I won't spend too much time on this because it's a little bit. And here are the scenarios, and as we see, we need to pick up a little bit more on that. Now the pillars are more. So we talked about the security of energy supply, climate change, and market competition. These are still very much in the agenda, but now we also see I think now we are really getting serious, because we are going from this idea that the energy transition is an energy transition to the idea that the energy transition is actually a common denominator, yeah, and that it can be used for structural changes in many other places, yeah, and so those structural changes are perhaps coming now. These integrated infrastructure systems where we connect them with each other much more, perhaps much more the presence of the prosumer, so the bringing in much more the communities in addressing that. This has been a blind spot, though a sweet spot, but blind spot in energy policy in Europe, where we have seen an enormous growth of engagement of small cooperatives, households, etc., but still kind of not really, and now realizing that these groups can play a major role in this transition. And another thing is that, bridge to avoid the leakages. And this is also, this is the systems thinking that is coming in really in the policy, yeah? One thing is you want to do renewables. So it's a transformation in the realm, within the energy sector itself. But if you want to do real serious work in restructuring energy systems, you're going to have to work. You can start locally, but you have to scale up. And just a week ago, an European commissioner was here to talk to the U.S. government about this, because Europe is going to put carbon taxes to actually be able to do this internally. You have to kind of tax the carbon that is coming in. Very quickly, the budget in Europe, is 1.3 million. But now, with the after the pandemic, we have now suddenly we have 2 trillion because of the new package, and that money is very important for this purpose. So this is really linked now to the new effort that this money has to be taking Europe in a different direction, in a structural change. Let me see if I have, well, I don't have the total here, but basically 1/5, as I said before, is climate related. And then there is money to actually correlate also with other sectors. So there is a real preoccupation to correlate, and in particular this idea that, embedded emissions, embedded energy needs to be acknowledged and dealt with in some way. So the recovery in Europe needs to go needs to be a green recovery. That's the idea. So there will be, I think I mentioned most of this, but the carbon border adjust mechanism is going to be a tough one. It's that why it needs the discussions. And in reality, it's already happening in Europe today, because the biofuels, as I mentioned before, is a controversial area. And today, you cannot find products from palm oil in Europe anymore. They have all been eliminated. We have projects a big project cooperation between Sweden and Indonesia, and I remember we talking to officials in Indonesia, and they kind of, now the European market is closed. And I said, yes, but you didn't want to do the homework, because they all the time pushed away the discussion that Europe wanted to have on sustainability. Brazil, on the other hand, had done the homework. In the beginning, it was also pushing away, but then realized that you did the homework, and the industry became much better. And but in Indonesia, they kind of didn't believe it, and now they have to do the homework. Carbon prices have been going up, and this is one of the things that will affect, of course, the whole spectrum of the energy system. And this is also, correlated to energy prices that are going up now very much, response for a lot of inflation that we have in Europe. So 5% inflation approximately in Europe now, and most of it coming from energy. There will be many revisions in the directives, but there is a lot of focus now within one of the focus of areas, of course, is the transport. Then there is something called the EU Taxonomy. And the EU Taxonomy is when the climate issue really reaches the financial sector. And this is the discussion that determines what kind of projects will be funded. What kind of projects are considered to make a substantive contribution to environmental objectives, these being climate change mitigation, adaptation, sustainable and protection of water and marine resources, transition to a circular economy, prevention and control, protection and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems. So if one project actually harms very much one of these objectives, they will not be funded. And here, the discussion has been really tough. And the most recent is that the lobbyists managed to put gas and nuclear power in the package and made many people upset. Austria said they are going to put the European Union to court because this is not acceptable, and so we'll see how it goes. But another discussion on greenwashing, because the investments we make now are going, these projects are going to be with us for the next 30, 40, 50 years. So it is very important that the financial sector is on board to actually fund what will bring a change over time. Now just a few words on the smart mobility. As you can see, there are a number of targets for the different decades, we can say. So we are going to go for a lot of electrification in transport. We are already feeling the effects of that, increased demand for electricity in the transport sector. But we will also see Europe developing. There is a work going on for hydrogen. It's still not a directive. It's still in the early stages. But that can come in eventually at some point, become a directive. There is a preoccupation to look at the different segments of the transport sector. So not only private transport, but also the vans, also the the heavy transport in general. So rail roads, electrified roads, and so there are very advanced programs in that area. In Sweden, one entry point that was used for electrification was with the buses. Bus transport is very important in Sweden, and we have a lot of collective transport in the cities. So I remember we had a project that we followed this development, and in 5 years, Stockholm, for example, that created a policy in that direction, went from 5% penetration, 8% penetration to actually basically 85% penetration. It's about 100% of the buses in Stockholm are running on renewable, and so is in many other parts. So I'm going to close in a few minutes. Just we have time for a few questions. This is also an important dimension of this mobility program. As you can see, there are 9 trans-European transport network corridors here, and these corridors, they involve different types of. They are multimodal corridors, and there are both hardware and software involved in this, because, for example, there is a determination that for trips that are under 500 kilometers, we should actually have carbon-free alternatives. So this will kind of, so there is a revamp of the train transport, but traditionally also the countries have their own systems, and if you want to book a trip that across Europe by train, it will take you, 2 days to plan that, because you have to go through this. It's already better, but there is interest in doing that, and there is demand for that. And so there is a lot of work in this. So this involves roads, railroads, also maritime transport. And there are different flagship projects related to that. So involving both, as I said, from pricing carbon, which is going to give a very clear signal, to greening the freight transport, so working with that segment in particular, or looking on issues of health, safety, and security. I couldn't let go say a few words only that Europe has a hydrogen strategy. This is still in the early stages, but it is growing. There is already, of course, hydrogen being produced for various reasons. Norway is not in the EU, but is pushing very much for the hydrogen economy. So Sweden is working on hydrogen for heavy industries. So there is a lot of movement around that, but not yet a directive. So it's still compared to the other documents and the other policies in Europe, it's still in a sketch form. But it is bound to take shape, I would say, relatively fast, because if you missed, there is a very interesting report came out from IRENA about the hydrogen routes and trade being discussed across the world, and looking also at the geopolitics, that this can actually have a very, very big implication. And you see here that Europe is very active in creating those routes. So challenges ahead, there are many. and some come in between, like the pandemic and things like that. But the important thing is that we have to cite the Swedish economist Johan Myrdal. We have to get a causative causation. And causative causation, cumulative causation, sorry. Cumulative causation is when you have a lot of people working in the same direction. And people are working in the same direction. Yeah, I'm wrapping up. Yeah, one more slide. I need to say this as well. This is we cannot be fooled by a picture like this that shows investments in renewable energy. In this one, we have China very big, then second the US, and then we have the other 10 that are investing in renewable energy. But if you sum up, actually Europe is putting double as much as the United States. So I think the United States needs to sharpen up and do much more. And why not join forces with the EU in this? So finally, the lessons from the energy and climate policy in 5 points. It is possible to increase welfare as we reduce carbon intensity, and I think this Europe has proven in this time that we had this reduction of emissions of 30%, and all economists were saying this was not going to happen. We had 60% increase in the economy of the year. Long-term goals can be orchestrated in a democratic society, which is very good because then you have this cumulative causation, you have people on board with you. Accountability and transparency is very important to build the trust and accelerate. That's why Europe was able now, with much less discussion, to accelerate this process because they have seen the benefits in jobs, etc. The energy transition, it can start locally, but it has to scale up, and this is why the EU is approaching the US for a closer cooperation. And we can leverage climate policy to transform the modern society. So it's not about nuclear power, it's not about the communities doing energy, it's not about the money, and it's not about the EU. It's about, we're going from our individual bubbles and saving the world. Thank you. So if it's time for questions, then I'm open. Yes, please.
Thank you so much for the interesting presentation, and especially the Swiss case. I'm from Ukraine, and we are not in EU now, but we really want to be in. And since this year, even Ukraine energy system will be including European energy system as a part of it. And I'm wondering, how do you think will hydrogen will play a crucial role in general energy transition for this neutrality? And if you see any signs, I mean some kind of projects already established and already ongoing, could you please share it with us? So could you please just share more information about hydrogen role for future transition?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question, and it is related, I don't know if the others heard, so let me rephrase briefly, is what role hydrogen could play in the energy. I think we need to be realistic about the time for building the infrastructure. We already have a lot of hydrogen movement, that's why I put that picture to show that there is a lot of movement. But the programs that we have here, when we talk about 2030, we're talking about 8 years. Is really, I mean, the players are there. There is a lot of interests involved that you are dealing with. You know very much in which direction you can go. And the European Union directives give very much the direction so that investors can know where they should go. And this is something that they always ask for. So this is happening. When it comes to hydrogen, there is still a lot more to discover. But I encourage you to take a look at the geopolitics report of IRENA, for a kind of a general view. And the question is always, where is a good entry point that you can scale up? And then from there, things go up. In the past, we have seen efforts towards transport. It didn't work very well. So it died out for a while. And now it's back because the climate issue is so much on the top of the agenda that even the skeptics are accepting that. So it's already affecting very much. And for Europe, it's become a strategy for competition. So we are on the other side. So this idea of protecting the companies, yes, it's still there, but because there will be shifts, there will be losers. But it's really an opportunity to build a new industry, and we already see that, and the jobs that the renewable is creating. There will be the issue of labor, qualified labor, so we need to start preparing in that direction.
Thank you so much.
Yes?
All right, thank you so much for your talk today. With wearing masks up, it's a little hard to hear, so I'll try to be as loud as I can. My question concerns biofuels and the long-term plan for decarbonizing the EU's mobility fleet. Certainly, over time, there's a certain amount of infrastructure required for facilitating that. Biofuels can somewhat provide a stopgap, but certainly, as you rightly commented, certain biofuels like palm oil have certain environmental externalities. Is there still an opportunity for certain types of biofuels or biodiesels or other elements of that process to be implemented in that time frame?
Thank you. Yes, the question is if there is still room for biofuels in the future. I would say yes. The EU accepts the biofuels coming in. Of course, they put the baseline is very high. The threshold is high. So in the past, the threshold was that you could count it as renewable if it would save 60% from emissions compared to the fossil fuels. Gives a little bit of a free ride in a way, something. But the biofuels has been, one step forward, two steps backwards in Europe. And not only biofuels, but also bioenergy in general. Not only biofuels, liquid biofuels for transport. And so there was a lot of movement in Sweden from the forestry side, the pulp and paper industry, feeling that, they were being left out from the taxonomy and wouldn't profit from it, which they found was quite absurd. But the bioenergy will play a role. And it's interesting to notice, I forgot to call your attention, that the countries that are doing best when it comes, most of them that are doing best in the renewable race are the ones that use a lot of bioenergy. So not necessarily biofuels for transport, but biofuels for transport do play a role. And if we think also globally, I think biofuels, because it's a neat way of starting. And for the developing countries can be quite interesting also as a way to improve quality of the air in the cities and to improve the sustainability of their fleets in a way that is relatively fast compared to creating a totally new infrastructure for electricity or hydrogen or any other alternative as Europe is doing, which is very, considering that you still have 1 billion people without even having electricity in the world. So I think biofuels will do, but the stringence is there, because also there is the issue of food security. So the problem was that there was a lot of land being used for producing biofuels instead of producing food, and this created a lot of controversy.
Well, thanks, Semida.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thanks for listening.